The game has many faces, and everyone has a story. My name is Jeremy Sheetinger, and come along for the journey as the farm system explores where the game was, where it is, and where it's going. From big league clubhouses to little league parks, this game has a lot to offer. For the first time ever, this series will attempt to pull back the curtain and demystify the game. The stories, those are endless as we pull perspectives from inside professional baseball, down through all levels of college, into high school and youth baseball, the highest levels of softball, business professionals, and even training facilities. Come along as we connect the dots and celebrate the special people from within our community telling their stories from inside the game we all love. This is The Game.
Everyone has a story. I'm Greg Brown, and this is my story. Yeah, I grew up in South Florida at an Optimist that was unbelievable breeding ground for young baseball players. I had an older brother, so I was at the ballpark from the time I could walk, and fell in love with the game, started playing at 4, and I was the kid who probably cared a little too much at an early age. You know, I didn't understand why little Timmy was making sandcastles while, like the ball's in play, but really had a passion for it and love. It was fostered through my family, who allowed me the opportunity to go to the field almost every night. I didn't play other sports until like probably middle school. For me, it was just always baseball. And I grew up in an environment where I went to school with the kids I played with, which I think was really important in fostering a lot of the kids who end up becoming big leaguers or coaches. Was our fathers coached us. We went to the field to see each other play, and then we went to school and we talked shit about it the next day.
Everyone has a story. I'm Justin Stone, and this is my story. The passion of the game that I grew up with, I grew up in a small town in southern Illinois, one stoplight, 6,000 people, and a family that just loved all sports. My mom and dad, neither one were college educated, kind of blue collar family. Sports for them was kind of an avenue probably for me, a ticket out of town and a way to get to college one day. Like nobody when they growing up at 6 or 7 years old was thinking about college at that point. But the love of the game, of all the games, football, basketball, baseball, we played whatever was in season. And my brother was 6 years older than me. So initially that love of the game came from me just wanting to be around my brother, and being able to play meant you had to keep up. So being 6 years younger, I got kind of baptized by fire in whatever sport I was playing, because the opportunity to get to play meant I had to be able to compete with older athletes. And so usually, like this happens with a lot of players that have siblings, the younger sibling tends to be a little bit better because of those opportunities. As I got older and excelled in different sports, it kind of became apparent to me, and not just in sports, but school as well, that my ticket out of town was going to be based on what I've earned and on my merit of earning that only. It wasn't going to be because my parents had money or going to afford me any opportunity, because they didn't really have any growing up. It was like, you're going to get exactly what you earn in life, and you need to understand that at a pretty young age.
It brought out the best in all of us. And so when we weren't playing baseball, we were out on the street playing football or playing two-man ball at the park, and then we'd go watch each other play. And I think that that led into my opportunities. Beyond there, like I was always kind of like the B All-Star. There was A All-Stars, I was always like the B All-Star. But I think that what was instilled in me from my father was work ethic. I think that we got to see that through these blue-collar coaches that were influencing our lives. And there was a passion for winning too. And I think that going up through that time got me into the high school ranks. And when I got into high school, got to go to a private school that was very competitive, and really had not as rich history as when we left it, and I think that the class that I was in and graduated in 1998 really led to a lot of winning based on who we were. And again, I go back into culture. I think we learned culture young, and I think that even now in my coaching, I utilize a lot of the lessons that I learned from back then. You know, the culture that I grew up in was something that was definitely influenced by the people that were running the park, running the system, but you also had to earn what you got. And I think that that allowed for like all the better athletes to kind of rise to the top, I think, within that environment. It's like they weren't being handed the opportunities to make all-star teams. They weren't being able to pay to be on teams. It was more so, it was an environment where if you had a good season, you were going to be rewarded. If you didn't, you were going to stay home that summer and not get to travel. Everything was in-house, and I think that when you look at how we even practiced, I'd go to the ballpark, my buddy's team was practicing, and their coaches would welcome us in to get extra swings. And you know, guys that at one point in time, without a catching guru that existed within our Optimist, we had 5 of us were playing professional baseball. 2 of them made it to the big leagues, all at the catcher position. And it doesn't really make sense when you look back at it as to the why, but I really think that that mentality that was brought from the fathers, from the leaders of the Optimist, brought probably a toughness that led itself to that position. It wasn't shortstops, it was catchers, and I'm proud to be part of that group.
My playing background is very modest. I was a good high school player in a couple different sports. I did play Division I football and baseball, which is fairly unique now because there's not many two-sport athletes at that level anymore. The football coaches when I was in college all said I was better at baseball, and the baseball coaches all said I was better at football, which means I probably wasn't. That's a nice way of saying you're not very good at either one of them. But I was a good athlete. But I always knew, even as a collegiate player, that if my days of baseball were numbered and I wasn't going to go on and play professionally, I was kind of that coach on a field. Even when I was a senior in college, I was the person that was coaching the freshmen and sophomores, teaching them the way, teaching what I'd learned as a freshman and sophomore. And I always kind of said I was exciting for my coaching career to begin.
Connecting the dots, my high school opportunity, I didn't get a scholarship until May of my senior year. Kind of putting that in perspective that we're seeing 8th grade, 9th graders commit now. I was constantly playing for my next opportunity. I knew I wanted to play longer. I knew I wanted an opportunity to play collegiately. I didn't have a great financial background where we were going to be able to afford opportunities. I didn't go to college camps. So it was a much different marketplace at that time. Fortunately, I had a high school coach and other support that took me around and got me in the right place, and ended up going to Lynn University, which is a Division II school in Boca Raton. Not a great tradition of winning, but I think that we were actually the catalyst to that changing within that program. During my time there, I ended up having an amazing experience with teammates. A lot of those guys are coaches now, a lot of guys are scouts now, and they ended up winning a national title after we had left, and some of my teammates ended up becoming coaches, and they were a part of that run. And I think that's a really important part of it. It's like we all felt the pride of winning there, despite it not being like us in the actual uniform at that time. And you know, you look back on how things work out. I wanted to play at the University of Miami. I wanted to play under the lights. But at the end, my goal was always to play in the big leagues. And so the route wasn't as a crow flies, but it was something that I was definitely still working towards. And so after my playing career was done, I actually had a terrible senior year. But I was fortunate enough that some people had thought well enough of me, and I got a free agent deal to play for the Marlins. And I ended up parlaying that. So I signed in 2003, played all the way through 2007, got released in spring training of 2007. But along that way, I mean, again, relationships, friendships, opportunities, well, it all came from how I went about my business every single day as a player. And I didn't get to play often. I wasn't very successful often, but I could really catch and I could really make pitchers better.
And I actually got my first full-time job in coaching at the Division I level, which is also pretty unique. I was still playing football at the time. I was in my 5th year, senior year, playing free safety at Eastern Illinois. And there was a couple notable players there. Tony Romo was there at the time. Brian Pace, the Bears GM, was a teammate of mine. But I started calling around at the end of the year looking for a grad assistant job. And I called Indiana State, which was right across the border from where I was playing at Eastern Illinois. They'd seen me play a number of times. They knew me as a player. I said, hey, do you guys have a GA position open next semester? I want to get into coaching. They said, actually, we don't have a GA position open. We have a full-time number 2 assistant position open. I said, but just for the experience of the interview, can I get an interview? And they said, sure. So I went in and interviewed against a bunch of Division II head coaches, JUCO head coaches, and I got the job. And I wasn't as qualified as any of them, but I think they saw somebody that had a lot of passion for wanting to teach, and they probably figured they can mold me into their style and not have any bias come in about the way they do things there. I had way more responsibility, and I was probably ready for it at the age of 22, and I was the youngest full-time college coach in the country. In fact, there were some players I was coaching that were actually older than me at the time. They were older 22-year-olds. But again, it gave me an opportunity to really embrace having responsibility. And my first year, I was the catcher and outfield coach. I'd never done either one of them. I had to learn how to teach that. And they purposely put me in a position of, we want you to be uncomfortable. We're not going to give you hitting right away. We're not going to make you the infield coach right away. You're going to learn how to coach. And you're learning how to coach something that you don't know much about.
When I got released, I ended up playing independent ball. I was 27 years old. I was the best player I had been in my entire career that year playing in the Atlantic League. And then I got a phone call about an opportunity to interview for a scouting job. And I realized, it was time to look on to like my next opportunity.
We told you these heavy balls are coming, babe. Look, there's a couple things that we saw in the market that we just had to make our own balls, right? So the first thing, I hate when heavy balls don't have laces. They're harder to toss, they're harder to hit. And again, visually for the hitters, they can see the laces. Awesome for that. The other thing that we saw in the market as well is that there's all these balls with different weights, and so they were all different colors. Our hitters started to cheat based on what weight that they knew that was coming. We didn't want them to do that. So now we have 3 or 4 different weights, we'll get to that in a minute, that are all the same color. So hitters can't cheat based on how heavy the ball is that they know that's coming in. Or we go all the way down to a 5-ounce ball. It's also focused on contact quality. And then the last thing as well, the balls in the market weren't heavy enough. So we have a 1.5 pound ball. So it is the heaviest hitting ball on the market to give our hitters more feedback of what it feels like to brace and have an impact with a ball that's coming at a high rate of speed. So we utilize this a lot for our high school, our college guys, and our pro guys. So we put all those into one package. And we also got our softballs that are coming out as well. Don't worry, they're coming here soon. But again, we saw that there was a lapse in the market for our softball girls. We got y'all. They're all coming. Let's get into the videos. You know, all of it is in one piece, just like always. Let's do it.
So transitioned into coaching right out of there because I was in the process of interviewing with a couple teams. And in that process, I volunteered at a junior college in Broward Community College at the time. It's now called Broward College, which is in my hometown, and worked for free and kind of cut my teeth and really was exposed to an awesome head coach who had a lot of great information to lead, especially as a volunteer coach. He's like, look, I can't fire you, so take some chances, go screw some guys up, but try to help guys along the way. And I really used that time to develop a lot of the series of drills that still are with me today. He exposed me to rotational hitting back with Mike Epstein's website when it was archaic, and I learned so much just from reading these like higher level articles on hitting that it felt like nobody in that space was talking about. So back in 2008, I started teaching rotational hitting.
So I moved to Chicago because I got married. I was a high school baseball and football coach, which is a really successful program in St. Louis. We went to the state championship in baseball and football my last year there. So I was like, I could do this job the rest of my life, and I would have. I was a high school English teacher. I had a great rapport with the kids. I had 2 great programs that I loved to coach. I would have stayed there the rest of my life and been happy. My wife's an attorney. Her job supersedes mine in terms of income. So I move out of St. Louis and I go to Chicago and I don't even have a job. So I start going around to different baseball facilities and saying, hey, I'm new in town. This is my background. I'm a former college coach, good successful high school program. Can I give lessons here? And a couple places said yes. One of those was the White Sox at the time was the first and only organization that had an amateur training facility. It was really a grassroots program that Jerry Reinsdorf put together to try to build White Sox fans at a really young age in a market where the Chicago Cubs have just always dominated. So I started doing lessons there. In about a month, they asked me if I wanted a full-time role, and I said, absolutely. So I actually took a pay cut to take this job because I was like, you're gonna pay me full-time, benefits, and I get to teach baseball every day. No mind, the pay wasn't very good. In fact, it was pretty poor, but I got to teach baseball every day. That was a win.
Yeah, the transition from playing into the beyond. I mean, because not everybody goes into coaching; they go into their careers. I think it was really difficult in a lot of ways because my family. I was married. We had our first child, and I had no income. And it was finding what was going to be the source. And so it really manifested itself into volunteer coaching and then lessons. Found different ways to make odds and ends meet, but I actually look back at that as fondly of a time in my entire career. You don't have any benefits, and you go to work every day. And I met some kids that heavily influenced who I am right now. Because there's one guy in particular who used to ride a bus from down in South Miami up University Drive, which is probably all in all probably an hour trip on the city bus. He'd come to practice, he'd stay late with me and do lessons. We'd go get dinner, and then I'd drop him off at the bus stop. And he did this for every day, and he was a redshirt that year. And so I look back, I think that one of the greatest lessons I learned too was I was struggling, but other people were struggling, right? And so how can we have empathy for the players? How can we have empathy for the others and what their circumstances are?
In coaching, it is rarely sunshine and rainbows. And people ask me a lot today, I'm 45 now, and I get questions from younger people in the profession that I think see the profession as I want to navigate my way really quickly through these waters and get to this position where I consider myself successful, or I can actually make a living in baseball, because that's really hard to do. It's tough to make a living in baseball because there's just not much money in it. And so what I tell them, and the answer is, well, I worked 360 days a year roughly for about 10 years for shit pay. Because of that, you're learning your craft, you're grinding. You truly have to have passion for what you're doing, because you're not doing it for the money. You're grinding to make a living.
Now, I'll be honest with you, I never wanted to be a scout, ever. I wanted to be a player. I wanted to be a coach. I wanted to be on player development. And then I got hired by the Houston Astros because that was my avenue back into professional baseball. And I was hired by a man named Bobby Heckman as a scouting director. And you go back and look at how history remembers him, his influence on the Houston Astros' success of recent years has his fingerprints all throughout it. And really, when you look at that, it goes into his level of understanding of what his area scouts were seeing, understanding, and how they communicated. I had no experience in the professional scouting world, but I had experience coming right out of a clubhouse. So I might not be able to describe the perfect grade on what that sinker is, but I know I caught it, as soon as 2 years prior to that. And so I think there were some advantages, and Bobby really helped expose me to the game in a way that I consider it like a film studies class that I had in college, where they start talking about the way the camera pans, and they start talking about, why the director use this type of lighting. Well, when you become a professional scout, you start looking at the game of baseball differently. And so I no longer can look at it from a fan's lens. I can find joy in that, but the reality is that you're constantly dissecting, whether it's tools, skills, or the can he play factor. So I think that I learned a lot during that time, and I was very fortunate to have that experience prior to becoming a head coach at a college. And so in 2010 summer, my former high school coach, who was the athletic director of baseball coach at a school called Nova Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale, was resigning as the baseball coach and going to remain as the athletic director. And he called me to see if I was interested in becoming the next head baseball coach. And so here I was at 30 years old. I lived 3 miles from the campus and really felt it was a sleeping giant. They had underachieved, in my opinion, had never been to the NCAA playoffs. 2009 team, they had 3 big leaguers, one multiple silver sluggers. 2 of them have been number ones in the big leagues with Miles Michaelis, Mike Fiers, and obviously JD being the third. There was a 4th player that was drafted within that group ahead of Fiers and JD. I mean, it was a really talented team, and they didn't make the playoffs in the postseason. And there's multiple reasons why a team doesn't succeed. But when Mike asked me for the opportunity to interview and what my thoughts were, I said, absolutely. I think it's a sleeping giant, and I think it's underachieved. And I was straight up with him, and I told him my thoughts on how we could get this program to reach higher levels. Fortunately, he named me the head coach in June of 2010.
my background while I was a coach at Indiana State was I got my master's in human kinetics. So I had no master plan. There wasn't like, oh, I want to get my master's in human kinetics and use this someday in baseball. It was literally, that was one of the three master's courses you could take and not have to leave the athletic office building. It's really cold in Indiana in December. I was like, if I can just walk down the hallway and get my master's degree, that sounds great. And it has a little bit of sports and stuff in it, better yet. So I kind of walked into that, but part of it was I was doing 3D analysis, a very rudimentary way, like 2D video. You have to digitize every single frame of 2D video, and one swing would literally take me an hour plus. Now you get it in 5 seconds on your iPhone. You can get it digitized and have a 3D animation on it. But 20 plus years ago, I was learning something that now is very desired in every field of sports, certainly baseball, and I'd been doing that for 20 years already. So once digital photography came about, it was much easier access to video. Computer programs started coming out with analysis features, and right away, I moved into that part of it because I'd already had a little bit of a background from it from my master's and took a very human movement concept to hitting. I'd hate to say I was one of the pioneers of that field, but I was certainly one of the people doing it really early on and learning, and at the same time of learning, publishing what I was learning. Like, I've never been a person to say I have all the answers. I certainly don't. Certainly never will. But I've always been one that's been very generous in saying, this is what I learned from these steps. This is where I failed in these steps. And I think it's sped up other people's learning in the game. And that's something that, 15 years down the road, I think people will probably remember. It'll be a legacy of this guy went a different way in baseball than probably what a lot of people had ever done before, but he shared it with us, and we got to see kind of the steps that happened along the way.
When the opportunity came for professional baseball at this 2019, like after the season, it was really intriguing to me because at this time it was the Tampa Bay Rays who were tapping me, but I still kind of came to peace that for my family, we're going to stay at Nova, and it's going to be the next 20 years. And I really was at peace. My wife and I, we went through it that summer with the other opportunities, and it felt right. And so when the Rays kept coming and talking to me, they were asking me about, what did I recommend anybody? Like, they kept having these conversations, and they were led by a former scouting competition of mine, which was Carlos Rodriguez. He was with the Blue Jays when I was scouting South Florida with the Astros. And that friendship that we sparked back then led to these phone calls happening. And we had always kept touch over time as he rose up the ranks within the Rays. But now he got named VP of Player Development and International Scouting. And so he was looking to do, like to reshape the hitting department. And I was somebody that he was very interested in. So I probably turned him down 3 or 4 times to interview, and he still, he found his way of getting me in front of people. And I just, once I got in the room with the Rays and met our people, it was the right fit for me, and I knew it. And I told my wife that night, I'm like, if the opportunity presents itself, like it comes to fruition, I think we're gonna have to do it, because I don't know that there's a better opportunity out there in professional baseball. Plus, this keeps my family home.
Started elite baseball training in 2011. There was never a grand master plan to have a big business. It was, oh, I have all these clients. they'll follow me to whatever facility I go because they're coming there for my product, not whatever shirt I was wearing at the time. And because you draw those personal relationships with people, and if you do a good job, they're going to follow you wherever you go. Found out pretty quickly that a one-man band in business is destined to fail pretty quickly too. I was doing all the marketing, if you want to call it that. I wrote the copy for the website. I was doing the scheduling of the lessons. Basically, your head was spinning of, I didn't think this out near as well as how I should. I need to hire somebody to help me. And the best thing I ever did was hire the CEO I currently still have 10 years later, who was not a baseball person necessarily. He was my intern for the White Sox, really good business sense, really good people skills, incredible work ethic. And that was my first hire and my best hire I've ever had. So I had somebody behind the scenes that's trying to, these are the steps we need to do to be an efficient business. This is some ideas on how we could grow the business. We kind of did that together. And it grew rather quickly. We were in a 7-cage facility early on. In 3 years, we were in a 13-cage facility. A year after that, we were in a 26-cage facility, built out a great big weight room, a biomechanics lab, and we're really one of the, probably the more state-of-the-art facilities in the country, and certainly the biggest. And on the north side of Chicago, where you think of an urban environment, but the north side of Chicago around Wrigley Field, which is where our facility's at, there's a ton of kids. It's a lot of young professional families. There are over 10,000 youth baseball players within 2 square miles of our facility and 3 giant leagues. So we have always a ton of players from that grassroots level age to the professional players, big leaguers included, that come in the off season in the mornings. And at any one day, you have the complete spectrum of baseball. I have the T-ball players coming in, learning baseball for the first time. We have major leaguers in the morning. They cross paths sometimes. It wasn't uncommon during COVID to see Anthony Rizzo and Jason Hayward playing catch out in my parking lot, and kids coming in for lessons, and Anthony's taking selfies with the kids as mom's dropping them off in the car in the parking lot. Like, how cool is it for a kid to come in to a baseball facility to learn a game that they're probably enjoying and maybe even love, and see your hero as you walk in the door, right? Like, so we have a lot of those like feel-good moments of the players always wanting to give back and seeing opportunities to do so when you're surrounded with all these younger kids that idolize them.
So in my current role as the hitting coordinator for the Tampa Bay Rays, I oversee the lower levels, which that means is the Florida Complex League, as well as the Dominican Academy that we have. Within that construct, there's probably somewhere around 85 position players that I oversee. In addition, we have a hitting leadership team, and the hitting leadership, we all collaborate on all of the players. So there's a lot of integration that we have amongst each other and the different roles that we have. And then, but I have a specific area. And so when hired, one of the things that we were tasked to do was we were trying to push it into the future. How do we get our hitting into the future? And so we did a lot of planning. We came up with a lot of like the key components that we felt were going to be the future of what Rays hitting looked like. And then the pandemic struck. And for the next about year, my job was completely different than what I had signed up for. Really difficult to do because there's no blueprint to this. This was just all of us just put our heads together and we said, this is how we're going to structure it. This is how we're going to educate. And that reset button really was a catalyst to our success of 2021. It was arduous, just like most of us, like, on the Zooms and how that became tedious over time. But on the flip side of it, what it allowed us to do was connect on a deeper level rather than what speeds up during the season. We were able to connect on a deeper level as to what we wanted to implement.
I didn't play a day of pro ball. So for the Cubs or any pro team, I would be considered an out-of-the-box hire. If you're outside the box hire, then you must be some progressive voodoo guy behind a computer screen. And that's probably the furthest thing from the truth with me. There's a lot of old school things I bring to the way I teach baseball and embrace because I played the same way, albeit not at the professional level. But what I've taken in my current profession and being able to take all these different technologies, most of which I say I was the first one to have because I was a consultant on a ton of technologies that were getting into baseball. So I usually had my hands on these things first. All it did is speed up the player development process. Why? because the things that we used to do subjectively and learn through trial and error, which is a good system. Trial and error was how we invented the light bulb, right? That system works. It's just not super efficient when you're working with a high number of players at the same time. When you have a minor league system, you have 120 players that you're responsible for on the offensive side. I can't go trial and error with all of them for the fact that, one, that's gonna take way too long. Two, we're gonna fail way too many times. And three, because of that failure, you're gonna lose trust with your athletes. So when we bring something to the player, it can't be guessing. We have to be right. And what allows us to be right and make our case to the player to speed up this player development process is we have the objective data to run behind it. So the concept of getting on top of the ball and the swing thought of swinging down is something that was taught 100 years ago. It's the same teach that we do for a high number of athletes right now, because the majority of athletes that we get with a swing flaw, in terms of bat plane, it's they're losing the barrel deep behind them and they can't make contact with an elevated riding four-seam fastball, probably the most prevalent pitch in today's game of baseball. So I can measure that and say, you are an underplane hitter. The way to get on plane and be able to attack that high four-seam fastball is you're gonna have to think getting on top of the ball and swinging down. And you know what? Here's the measurement behind it. So they're very similar concept that's always been taught. I think we just take the guesswork out of, because as we're learning, the different styles of player that come into us is literally 120 different styles that I have. Therefore, I have to have 120 different coaching styles to combat that, different philosophies. So there isn't a one way to do this in our system. This is the best way for you, and it might be completely different from the way I teach the guy that comes into the cage after you. When I took the director of hitting job for the Cubs, I was the first director of hitting in Major League Baseball. And honestly, I kind of wrote my own job description. So the director of hitting role really crosses a broad spectrum of a lot of different departments. I hire the coaches. I bring in the overall arching philosophy, which you heard me say earlier is individualized for each player. I make the individual plan for each player. I go and evaluate how that plan is going and tweak it as we go. So you're marrying your player plan with what you're doing in R&D to measure it. So because I have the background in biomechanics, in analytics, I'm looking at those measurements, putting it in baseball terms to coaches who have a little bit of training in this, but I don't expect them to be experts. I want the coaches to coach. So if I can take all of that off their plate and get very poignant to this is what you need to get better at, and this is how we're gonna measure, are we getting better at it? Then that's kind of my role. Now, you wanna train and hire really good coaches that they are the people that execute it.
The advice I would give somebody that's trying to transition into professional baseball is create, wherever you are, create it as the big leagues right now. So if you're a GA right now at a college, be the best GA in the country. If you're a head coach at a JUCO, make that JUCO the image that you want to be in that's going to reflect who you are. And I think that too many people are aspiring to get to positions. If you're good at what you do, those jobs are going to find you. The future of baseball does not have archaic ways, nor does it have all new age. Like it's somewhere in between. How can you be the best hybrid? How can you be curious enough to learn from the new and the old and make that version so that when you meet the player where he is, that if he needs new school, you give it to him. If he needs old school, you give it to him. If he needs somewhere in between, you're able to give it to him. And that's the most dynamic you can be.
For player development, I think the amount of technology that we have access to is coming faster than our ability to understand it completely. So I think what you're going to see going forward in pitch design and improvements in swing plane and bat path, is I think at some point we're going to have a wearable technology that is going to give us a better understanding of muscle firing patterns and allow us to get some of the kinematic graphs that we get right now, that you have to wear these different harnesses and suits or use markerless 3D technology. It's going to be integrated into the uniform at some point, which will be really cool for us from a coaching standpoint to get real-time feedback and data that usually takes a long time to process.
Player development, when I was growing up, it was a lot about just hard work, and it wasn't giving the science behind it. It wasn't giving a lot of coaching directives. It was actually very simplified, and I think that to a degree, it was what we needed at that point in time. Like the players, like thinking about who I was and what I understood was I was going to work through it. And if I needed to learn to hit a line drive to the backside, I was going to do it 1,000 times if that's what it took for me to get there. And so I think that I would have benefited a lot from some of the newer thoughts within player development, because it would have got me there a lot faster, which maybe I would have been able to acquire other skills a little quicker. But I think that going through the process of it, hard work being instilled in us was something that I think they valued over necessarily knowledge. And I think when you look at today, I think that today communication is more important than knowledge. I'd rather somebody who's a great communicator and knows how to reach a player, and then we can, as a coordinator, we can help them find maybe like some of the key points that we want to influence.
The cognitive side is something that we don't understand very well. The brain is the least understood piece of the human body. So much so that I still haven't got any clear answers from neuroscientists on how a player even hits a baseball, because from the physics standpoint, it's a thing that should be impossible. We don't have enough reaction time to make the ball-bat collision happen with accuracy based on how quickly we have to make the decision to do it and how quickly we must get our swing off. It should be an impossible thing to do. So I think the neuroscience realm is going to be something that we're going to get better at some point. And I think that's not just for baseball, that's for life and everything else. And also the visual side. I think we still have a long way to go on the visual side.
Where I see the game going in the next 10 years is I think that the efficiency and development, I think it's going to get better on the hitting side. I think that there's been amazing advancements in pitching, in creating, changing the course and direction of players' careers. I think in hitting, we've been doing that, but I think that there's still tapping into the brain and understanding how swing decisions are made and how people process information is probably the next evolution within the hitting process. That I think that we're all trying to, whoever gets there first is probably going to, strike gold. But I think that leads into the game flipping back a little bit to what you hear a lot of, like the way the game used to be. I think that when hitters become more dynamic, the game becomes more dynamic. When hitters become more siloed, like in their skill and ability or attribute, and they're only trying to hit a driver, well, that dumbs down the enjoyment part of the game. So I actually think that there's a better game ahead of us, even though pitching is going to continue to push the envelope and nastier pitches, and every reliever you see has a 7, or multiple 70s in their bag. I think that we're going to be able to take hitting to another level that has a little bit more of like the combating what the pitching has been done. I think we're behind, but I think we're catching up as an industry. And I think that you're going to see that too, though, like flip at the youth level if we start emphasizing the right things. So the prospect of 5 years from now that's going to be a first rounder who's in 8th grade, if we're implementing the right fundamentals in when I say like the right goals within those players, they're going to become much better professionals. But if we negate that and they have to learn it at the professional level, it's very, very difficult because you're facing the best competition in the world.
Everyone has a story. I'm Adrian Dinkle, and this is the story of Southeastern University.
Everyone has a story. My name is Sheets, and this is the story of Georgia Gwinnett.